My name is Vinton. I'm the producer and director of The Adventures of Mark Twain. And my role basically in the film was fairly comprehensive since it was a small crew. End up doing just about everything, even as a director, producer. Well, Hugh Tyrrell actually interested me in The Adventures of Mark Twain, or the idea of doing something with Mark Twain's works. And I was not too sure. I wasn't sure whether, the classic things like Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn were the things we wanted to do. But, and I was a little bit dubious about the whole idea initially. And Hugh actually sent me very complete works of the adventures of Mark Twain's works, short stories, novels, and so forth. And I started kind of reading some of them and was really taken by some of the amazing stuff. Some of the stuff that I was not familiar with, things like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, which I'd read in school, were amazing and had really a cool quality and a very sophisticated, sometimes very dark quality about them that intrigued me. And so anyway, eventually we decided that we would make a film somehow combining not just one work of Twain, but rather kind of all of his works in some way, or in representative ways, with representative stories. And then also using some of his characters and even himself, who in the end was kind of the most interesting character of them all. The autobiographies of Twain are fascinating, and he was such a complex character with these sort of two sides, even, that we ended up really liking the idea that Twain himself is kind of a split personality with a light side and a dark side. Twain said himself, that everyone's a moon that he never shows, with a dark side that he never shows to anybody. And it was really was fascinating to try and pull some of those things, all of those different kind of qualities, into a single story. A huge challenge on the part of Susan, the screenwriter, and Hugh and myself, but really a pretty cool process and a very rewarding one as well. The Adventures of Mark Twain probably cost in 1985 probably about $1.5 million to make dollars. And was made over about a 4.5 year period by a tiny crew of really only about 17, 18 people altogether, about 5 animators, 6 animators maybe, and the rest support crew. Really a small crew doing an amazing kind of labor of love, obviously, especially for the kind of budget that we were doing it for then. To make a film like this in today's costs and filmmaking, labor costs and so forth would be a phenomenally expensive process, 20 times at least, what we probably spent for it back in those times. But it was a variety. It was an opportunity to continue what we were trying to do with some of the short films in claymation that we were doing, and to experiment on the highest level, on the grandest stage, which was the theater or theatrical setting. And so I think we were just really highly motivated to sort of make it the ultimate and final experiment almost in claymation. I actually started out my experimentation in filmmaking with live action as much as with kind of stop motion and pixelation in college. And so I naturally kind of liked shooting live action, I think, when I first started on these films. And we always shot, I always liked to shoot reference film of the actors as they were doing their lines. The actors, most character actors are very sort of broad and do great gestures and movements and wonderful things, usually with their faces, because they're very expressive in their voices, and it's impossible not to sort of do a lot of stuff with your face at the same time. And so what we always liked to do is to sort of take, not copy it verbatim, but take cues and ideas from the actors and incorporate those into the animation. So in addition to basically cutting together a kind of an animatic with storyboard frames and all of the track all edited in its entirety, I always like to cut together a reference film of the entire film, which matched the animatic. So you had cuts in it and so forth, but the cuts were with actors. And so you ended up with kind of a crude movie, if you will, live action movie of the whole film before you even started. And it was a couple things were really valuable in doing that. One, of course, is that it's another way of kind of pre-visualizing how the film is going to work and whether it's going to play, whether the timing works and all that sort of thing. But perhaps more importantly, it's a great tool for the animators and for the director to talk about, performance on each and every shot. So when an animator is ready to go in to shoot a particular scene, we could look at the animatic, we could go in and look at the reference film and what the actor, how this performer interpreted that moment. And I'd have a chance as a director to sort of say, but where we're going is this, so we need to have more comedy, or we need to do this or that, whatever it was. So you had something to kind of talk about. So it was a terrific additional tool to add to our bag of tricks in organizing each and every shot. I worked on a few scenes with as an animator, but for the most part, we had enough animators that it kept me completely busy just to what we would say is launch the animators on each of their shots. So, and that meant that we would work on a shot, we'd look at the shot, usually on the flatbed editing table, look at the animatic, look at the reference film, talk about log out the sheet that had all the dialogue on it and so on, and really talk about what a particular scene had to do for the rest of the story, for the rest of the next sequence, or what came just before and just after that we needed continuity to show continuity on. And so, all of those technical things you'd sort of work out and scribble them down, and the animator would write them, and we'd talk about them. But then you'd get into the more subtlety of the performance itself, and how far you might be able to take it, how cartoony it might be, or how realistic it was. And then once we had that conversation, I would also sort of usually set up a lot of the shots, and I also was kind of the director of photography, which took a lot of my time as well, because I do a lot of the camera work, set up the shots, basically do lighting or final tweaking of the lighting and so on. And basically meaning launching the animators meant it's okay, let's go for it. And then they would spend whatever it was, a day, shooting that scene one frame at a time, while I was on to the next scene or working with the next animator and so on. In addition to that, I actually ended up doing, again, we're a tiny crew, so I did all the special effects. We created a lot of special effects in this film with front screen projection, which was, somewhat used, but rarely used, I would say, in animation, and certainly not, the only way you would want to do it is in claymation, I think, or stop motion animation, where some of the things, like in the skies, for example, the storm would be a really good example, where you have, we wanted everything in it to be purely clay. And so the idea was even the clouds were clay, made of clay. And so they were clay painted first in multiple layers, a background layer that was like a solid layer, and then we'd superimpose wispier layers of clay painting in front of that in layers. And that would all be composited on one piece of film. And then that, when you would shoot a character, we used a front screen projector, which bounced the image off and then into the lens. It's a little complicated, I won't get into that right now, but we used that to basically composite the backgrounds in the camera one frame at a time while we were animating, so that the backgrounds would advance one frame at the same time that you were animating a character, just one frame, and then you'd advance it and shoot that frame and go on to the next. So it was complicated, It required a lot of tweaking and testing and setting up, which also took a lot of time. I think one of the things that I'm most pleased about having made The Adventures of Mark Twain is kind of the position and the role that it played almost in, as I look back on it, almost in the history of and the growth of 3D animation. Mark Twain, I've said many times before, was it was really the first all claymation feature film, and we were very pure about it in the sense that everything there was claymation and made of clay. And I don't think a film will ever be made purely like that, probably ever again, probably because there's a lot of work and because it's very difficult to sculpt every frame as opposed to, use other tools. But significantly, Twain was both a very adult film, and meaning that it appeals to adults, way ahead of its time, way before its time, because at the time when it was released, it was really being released to an audience or a market that was primarily animation was for kids. That was they were sort of synonymous. And in addition to that, when I look back on it, Mark Twain was kind of an opportunity for 3D animation to really sort of prove itself. Before that, there was question, even in minds of critics and so on, that whether something like claymation could sustain an hour and a half of interest for people. And the same thing, actually, interestingly, you heard about computer animation when it first emerged, was people were doubting, no, it can't, it's interesting techniques and so on, but it'll never sustain, for long periods of time. And so it's really kind of funny when you think back on those things. But I think the significance of Twain was that it really kind of opened the door in some ways. It was some of the first 3D feature-length imagery that most people, I think, had seen. Mark Twain really was a milestone kind of film, and has its place, I think, in the evolution and development of 3D animation, which is absolutely here to stay.